Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our May Dime webinar. For folks who haven't attended one of our webinars before, this is one of my favorite events in the series. We really do have the opportunity to hear from leading experts in the field and get the opportunity to dig into some of the most pressing and timely topics. And certainly thinking about how we're powering successful digital health innovation through successful VC funding couldn't be a more pertinent topic right now. And we have an extraordinary group of experts here to offer some remarks and to engage in conversation with you all. Before I introduce our experts for today, first of all, I should introduce myself. My name's Jen Goldsack. I'm the CEO here at the Digital Medicine Society, or DIME. DIME, for folks who don't know, is a global nonprofit, and we are dedicated to advancing the safe, effective, ethical, and equitable use of digital technologies to optimize health. I think the importance of our innovator community cannot be underscored enough as we pursue that goal. And this is a really important conversation today. How do we make sure that those innovations that have a real chance to improve the lives of the patients that we're all here to serve, and also contemplate the challenges that our clinician colleagues are having today, how can we make sure that they have the runway to be fully developed and to be fully deployed into the healthcare environment? That's going to be our discussion for today. Before we dive in, for folks who may not have joined us on our webinar before, if I can figure out how to use my slide, or my mouse in this case, let's just do some housekeeping so you're all comfortable. So first of all, full disclosure, this session will be recorded. That's great if you have colleagues who weren't able to join live. We will post this recording within 24 hours, and we will make sure you all have the link to circulate this. It will be posted to the DIME website. In addition, Aaron, Ben, and Owen have very graciously agreed to sort of structure this important session to include plenty of time for conversation. So we invite you to pose questions as you have them. There's a couple of ways you can do that. Please feel free to use the chat as questions come up, even as our experts may be giving opening remarks. Also, when we do turn it over to discussion, raise your hand. Not like this. Use the little reactions toolbar in the bottom of your Zoom panel. When we see that, if you're somewhere where you can chat, we will unmute you and you can pose your question live and really engage in some conversation here. That's our goal. So with that, that's probably more than enough of me today. Let's meet our experts. So I will call on you each. I'd love to hear a little bit about your background as an entrepreneur, as a leader in our field, and also tell us a little bit about your organization so that we have context for this conversation today. And Aaron, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you today. I'm a little unnerved by being called an expert 5 times. I'm going to go with knows a little bit about the topic and not as much as Ben or Owen. That's the way to think about me. I am the founder and CEO of BehaVR. What we do is, first of all, we work in the medium of virtual reality. We believe it has some really unique and important properties, neurologically speaking, from this, how we can use this multisensory simulation for the effects that we intend. The space we're operating in is we create both wellness products as a foundational experience, and then with a pipeline of prescription digital therapeutics around a cluster of stress, anxiety, depression, pain, opioid, and substance use disorder, sort of a highly comorbid cluster in the mental and behavioral healthcare domain. And we've been at it, almost 6 years at some level since the founding of the company. I've had the privilege of knowing Ben and Owen for many years. Hugely respect them, and this should be an interesting discussion today along with them and you, Jen. So good to see everybody.
Fantastic, Aaron. Thanks so much for being here today. And I love that you'd counted to 5 on that. I feel like I was clearly making you uncomfortable, but I sort of like it.
I don't know if it was 5. But...
it's a nice way to jump off our conversation today. And Aaron, welcome. Ben, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm Ben Lewis, CEO and co-founder of Limbix, and we create prescription digital therapeutics targeting adolescent mental health disorders. I assume that most of the viewers on this webinar are familiar with prescription digital therapeutics, but for those that aren't, companies like us and BehaVR, we're building products which are regulated medical devices, software as a medical device. We have to build on a qualified quality management system and then run multiple rigorous clinical trials to prove their products are safe and effective. And then we submit those trial results to the FDA with a 510(k) de novo application so that we can be cleared as a prescription digital therapeutic. There are a number of companies in this space targeting different modalities like virtual reality or targeting certain populations or certain indications. Our company specifically is focused on adolescent mental health disorders. And so we've been fundraising as a PDT company for the past few years. Prior to starting Limbix, my background is really in tech and entrepreneurship. I've been doing startups since 2008, starting multiple previous companies outside of healthcare, having gone through large fundraising rounds, large exits, et cetera. And I've been really excited over the past 6 years to be working at Limbix.
Fantastic. Ben, terrific insights into what you've been working on, what you're forging ahead with at Limbix, and what you're going to be bringing to the discussion today. So welcome. Owen, last but not least, do you want to round us out here?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks, Jen, for tapping me in, and thanks everyone for joining. Aaron's one of his finest qualities is humility, because I think you'll also learn a lot from him. So my background, I'm a bioengineer, MBA, co-founder and president of a company called MedRhythms, which I'll tell you about in a second, which was started in 2016. In addition to MedRhythms, I'm an advisor to the World Health Organization in digital health, as well as the current chair of the Digital Therapeutics Alliance Board of Directors. And so that's, which I believe Limbix and Aaron's company are members, BehaVR. MedRhythms, we build digital therapeutics that help people improve their walking following neurologic injury or disease. We actually started out of Spalding Rehab in Boston, where my co-founder was a clinician, and he was treating patients sort of live and hands-on with how you can use rhythm and music to help people improve things like their walking speed and their quality. And the science he was doing was very manual at the time. Like, he'd watch someone walk, analyze that with his eyes, and like adapt the rhythm in real time, and was getting tremendous results. But there was a couple thousand people trained like him in the world in these interventions. And so we really started MedRhythms around this question of how do we take what Brian was doing and reach more people? And the answer ended up becoming digital therapeutics, where we thought we could take sensors and measure what Brian was looking at on someone's feet. We can measure quality and speed and how synced they are to the music, et cetera. Feed that into a handheld device, software product, analyze that in real time, screen music for where the rhythmic qualities are, and create these closed loop clinical thinking algorithms that deliver interventions for all of the conditions that the science could apply to. Like Ben and like some of Aaron's products, have taken a heavily a regulated prescription approach to how we build our products. Our farthest along product is for people with chronic stroke walking deficits, and those are the people that have plateaued after their recovery cycle and told they're never going to get better again. And there's 3.5 million of those in the U.S. We just announced a second product that's advanced fairly far via partnership with Biogen in multiple sclerosis. That will be to target improving walking within that population. In addition to that, earlier last year we closed our Series B financing round, $27 million, led by Morningside Ventures, partnered with Universal Music Group, actually, because when we get into this, we didn't know that we would need this, but because we're actually modifying music on the fly to deliver the interventions, you need to go back to the record labels to get the rights to do that. So we now have the rights for 50% of the world's music to use in our screen and to use in our platform. And look forward to talking about many different areas of the discussion today. So this should be a fun time.
Owen, first of all, I didn't know about the origin story of MedRhythms, so I enjoyed learning about that. And how cool, if we get a chance, I want to make sure we cover how you're able to pin down that as an asset, access to sort of modifying all of those recordings. That's terrific. Congratulations. I'm sure there are some more stories. So many lawyers.
We have so many lawyers involved with our company that we shouldn't cover that part of the story. So
That's right. That might need a beer, actually. I misspoke there. Fantastic. And one thing I do want to do while we're all on the Aaron Gani sort of fan club bandwagon, Aaron also serves as a member of our strategic advisory board here at Dime. So has provided sort of guidance and time and insights to this community and to me, quite frankly, since the beginning. The other thing as well is we discuss sort of supporting functions and what's needed for success for an organization. Dime is a nonprofit, but we are still young. So we are just 3 years old, and we've been delighted to have the support of First Republic Bank as we got off the ground, really helping us as an organization, and they are our sponsors of the webinar today. So I wanted to give a shout out to their team, and also to Anthony, who's on the line today listening in, who's been a great partner to us and really helped make sure that we launched Dime successfully and we had the infrastructure we needed to pursue our mission on behalf of the patients we're all here to serve. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you guys. I know that you have some talking points that you predetermined are critical for us to cover as we address this topic. Let me hand the mic over to you, and then we'll dive into discussion when you tell me it's the right time.
There we go. I don't know that I would consider these critical. These were just some ideas we had about, what the audience might be interested in. So we'll kind of free form it here, and certainly we'd love to just answer questions as well. The building and funding a PDT company is different. It takes a lot of patience. In the intros, I think we all founded our companies in 2016. Is that right, Ben and Owen? All 2016?
Yep, 2016.
Yeah.
That's a nice coincidence, but that's why it's sort of, wow, 6 years. It takes time. It takes a lot of time, patience, capital, to put the work in to get the design right, the translation of whatever your underlying science is into the design of the product, to expose it to real users, potentially real clinicians, iterate, and climb the sort of evidence pyramid, right? With initial sort of acceptability, tolerability, and then feasibility, and then ultimately, randomized controlled trials, and takes a lot of capital. We'll talk a little bit about partnerships. I know both Owen and I have some pretty interesting pharma partnerships that are structured sort of like biotech deals. I'm not sure if Ben does, but he may. We can talk a little bit about reimbursement, which is always an interesting question in this space. And there is progress. It's not completely all settled. Not all the rails are quite laid in the industry, but we're getting there. And then if we have time, there's some interesting themes around how we as digital natives can really lead the way in value-based care contract structures. And then, there's also a lot going on in the market. So if we're going to have a fundraising discussion, talking about all of the storm clouds and thunderbolts outside our windows is maybe interesting as well. So we don't, I guess, technically have a moderator. It seems like maybe I'm doing that a little bit. Maybe Ben, could you take that first bullet a little bit and talk about that progression? You've understand that well.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Building a prescription digital therapeutics company and getting funding for one is very different than a traditional type of business, either a consumer business or an enterprise business, or even a more traditional healthcare business. I've gone through that fundraising and company building from B2B and B2C, and seen a lot of traditional healthcare companies get built, and PDTs are very different. For a number of reasons. It's in some ways closer to pharma, in that your R&D process as a PDT company is much longer than a traditional software development. And that's then exacerbated the fact that what early investors told me is, a normal company, you're looking for kind of a slope that's like goes exponential. So you're seeing maybe 6 months to a year of R&D, and then you start growing revenue, and it grows exponentially. And they're going to look for that growth in revenue or consumer traction as product market fit in order to fund new rounds of funding. With a PDT company, they're looking for more pharma style revenue, where it's flat, it's zero for years, and then it spikes up. Right, and you should go from making $0 a year to $20 million a year, overnight. And that's how drugs work, right? You might spend $1 billion developing a drug, but then you're making, $1 billion or billions of dollars annually after that drug is launched, because you've got a commercial engine in place to get it out to market, and you're also getting reimbursed at a pretty high dollar amount. So in this case, what we found is that traditional pharma investors can be a bit reluctant to invest in software. And traditional SaaS type investors are reluctant to invest in PDTs. So you really need to find this sweet spot of investors that understand prescription digital therapeutics and want to put money into them and believe in the growth of the market. And fortunately, there are enough of those investors to fund companies like ours. And they've also seen nice returns, at least on paper, from companies like Therapeutics or Achille or Wobot, which started out as small businesses and are now worth $1 billion-ish, each of them. And so that's particularly helpful for companies like us. But what has been, I would say, a pretty big headwind is the fact that none of those companies are making money right now. And so while the investors are looking for this like straight vertical line of revenue after years of R&D, unfortunately, those companies haven't yet achieved that. And it doesn't mean they won't, but there's still, I'd say, some time between now and when we see large scale national reimbursement 1 to 3 months after a product is cleared. And that sort of business model risk has made existing PDT investors a bit more skittish today than they might have been 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, well said,
Yeah,
Ben.
I mean,
Go ahead now.
yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I think back to when we first started to fundraise and for MedRhythms, I think we made all the mistakes. Whereas, you know, we sort of like did scatter shot, try to get meet with as many investors as possible, and you kind of get caught up with some software investors and some SaaS investors. And what we found was, particularly the strategy we were taking, that like we wasted our time for like 6 months. Oh, yeah. And like the first question after that point in time, I was like dangling in front of people, or the first thing is like, we are going after like an FDA approved product. And like that would call the herd to people that like were really serious at diving in, whether they're a life science investor, like you mentioned, that may not like software, but like they understand FDA risk, or a software investor that was getting in. That was one thing I found that was super helpful in the beginning, even in the emails, like that people would pass early and often, so we wouldn't waste our time with the wrong folks. And so found that very helpful in the early days. And then to your point, I mean, I think as you think about the industry, right? The industry, I mean, I guess if you remove like WellDoc, which is older than much of it, but yeah, like if you like with a critical mass, it's like 6, 7. I've been saying 5 years for 2 years, so it's probably like 7 years old now. And like as and we're going to touch this in a minute, as Aaron was mentioning, like the railroad tracks for reimbursement are just starting to get laid, but that's sort of a normal progression in healthcare, right? Like it's like, okay, is there a there? Like, can you make a clinical benefit? And then like, can you get it like approved and rigorously built is like the next question that gets answered. And like, will people start to use it and will it benefit them as the next question? And then like reimbursement like lags, you know, if you look at any of those, like gene therapy, any of those, is like 5 to 7 to 10 years before. So we're in that phase. We haven't seen, as you said, Ben, that like straight line pop after 3 months, but the tracks need to be there for that pop to happen for many of the companies, and those are getting laid, and we'll see how they pan out.
You were spot on about that. The track, that's exactly the analogy we used as we board, like the train tracks, and it makes sense. We have a train right now that might be headed toward a brick wall without reimbursement, or hopefully, you know, the companies that already have cleared products are starting to break down that brick wall. And actually, over the past, I would say 2 to 3 months, we have seen more, development with PDT business model than we had probably the previous 2 years. Right, it's been a really exciting Q2 in the PDT space, both from reimbursement announcements as well as from just some of the legislative opportunities right now on the docket, thanks to societies like the DTA. It is definitely a more exciting time now than it used to be, but pretty much every investor in all of our 3 companies had to say at some point that they were comfortable with the business model risk and that they expected it to be figured out at some point.
Mm-hmm. And investors are definitely pattern matchers. You know, they have a lot to process, but you got to have your own strategy too. Like we deliberately, part of our strategy is in VR, we think there is an important opportunity to create foundational experiences, which are, calming and soothing and things like mindfulness, and like they have value, psychoeducation and so on. But there's no argument for saying they have to be a prescription digital therapeutic. And then as the PDTs come online, those will become extensions of our experience. I have literally had investors say to me, if you weren't doing that wellness stuff and only PDTs, I'd be more interested. And I've had other investors say the opposite. If you had more commercial traction with the wellness stuff and weren't doing the PDTs, I'd be more interested. So the point is, you can't completely adapt to what they want. You just got to have your strategy that you think works for you and go forth. But the other thing I learned too slowly is the point Owen made about, they're kind of their job to take the meeting and learn from you. And so, filtering and getting to the investors that actually want to take the regulatory risk and the clinical risk and have the patience is an important thing. So I'm a slow learner, but I finally got there. As Owen said, you got to cut them off early if they're not really on board with you.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. You ask in the very beginning of the call, if you don't even do your email, do you know who Therapeutics is?
Right.
Do you know what a PDT is? Do you know what cognitive behavioral therapy is? Like, if you don't know the answers to any of those 3 questions, this isn't going to work out. And then we're like, all right, how quickly can we get off this call? But the thing is, you never know, right? You never know. Some of our investors were their first PDT investment, and we're the first company that ever told them about PDTs. And they're investing for a number of reasons, including the lead investors in the round are exciting to them, or they're excited about the team, or they're excited about the opportunities. But it's not a significant percentage of the cap table by any stretch.
So
yeah, it's interesting.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry to jump in there. These are more generalizable things, but anytime I hear an investor tell me one thing about why they don't like the business, I ignore it. And if I hear it 5 times, then maybe I'll think about it, but it's like porridge. It's always too hot. It's always too cold. You're always too late, or you're always too early. So ignore it for the first few times is sort of how I think about it. That if it's 5 times, maybe you pay attention to it. And back to this, I don't know, the lead, I think you were hinting at, Ben, you get a lead term sheet, and then everyone's back, right? Everyone who said no comes back and is like, can you carve out room for me now, even though I don't really like what you're doing? It's it's such a interesting cycle. So
yeah.
So guys, let's talk. Oh, sorry, Ben.
One of the things we did, and this is advice to pretty much any startup, is I take every meeting if an investor wants to talk. Because at the very least, you learn more about the investor, you meet them, and that's generally beneficial. It doesn't take that much time in a Zoom world, which we've moved to. You used to drive to their office in San Diego, it would take 2 hours out of your day. Now it's 30 minutes on Zoom. And I always take the opportunity to bring members of the team to these calls, especially the first calls, because then they get to take part in these pitches. They get to hear the pitches as we're describing our business model to the investors, and they get to have a more elevated role in the business. So it's 99% of them are obviously a waste of time because they'll never want to invest in us, but you make it less of a waste of time when you do those sorts of things.
So guys, let's talk about partnerships a little bit. So it's not a silver bullet, but there are these opportunities to bring in resources, financial and otherwise, non-dilutive capital, as well as, brain power resources. Owen, do you want to talk a little bit about your Biogen deal and how that works and structured? And I can add to that with our Sumitomo work.
Yeah, no, happy to. And this is another way to think about funding businesses is through maybe non-dilutive capital from customers or partners, right? So I think it's helpful as you think about it from that strategy. As we looked at partnerships, and as we landed on and moved forward with someone like Biogen, we have a sort of a pretty we really wanted to understand motivations for anyone who would want to partner with us. There's many motivations for why companies might want to partner with digital assets and things, right? In pharma, it could be companion apps, right, with drugs, which was not what we were interested in. Could be the data, which is not what we're interested in. In our case, we're an intervention. We help people improve something. And if someone doesn't value it as a standalone intervention, then it's not worth moving forward in our mind. And in this case, there was a mutual understanding that it was an intervention. And with, Biogen, and I'm going to be careful not to disclose more than what I'm allowed to disclose. But with Biogen, we came to the point and we inked a deal last week where we're going to do co-development of a product for MS as a standalone asset. And they are going to commercialize said product on the other side of that. And we're going to go through all the processes it takes to take it from feasibility stage where it is now into commercial in the geographies that make sense for it to be commercialized in. And along the way, there's an upfront payment, which we announced, and then there's development milestones, which could be pre-market or could be post-market, that come as we hit certain milestones. And then there's royalties on the commercialization side. And so for us, it's sort of funds development of a product that, you know, we can, you know, do well on commercially, and we can achieve our mission of like reaching the patients that deserve the care that we have. And so it was a win-win scenario, and we're just starting to operationalize it. I know you've been working on yours a little longer, Aaron, so you probably have some operational stories there, but that's how it's set up. It's a great way for non-dilutive capital, and also to merge what both organizations are good at to like serve the patients that we serve.
Yeah. All well said, Owen. And so our deal parallels yours a lot. Ours is with Sumitomo Pharma from Japan, and then their U.S. subsidiary Sanovian is involved. We did our first deal with them, which was smaller and simpler back in 2020. Progressed with them, got to know them. That was really for a wellness product that becomes the foundation and comes to market later this year. And then we announced a very similar deal to yours, Owen, with 3 new therapeutics in anxiety and depression that we will co-design and develop. And ultimately they will commercialize in geographies around the world. I'm going to give a shout out to our shared resource, and we'll blow up his inbox. Hopefully that's what we'll do for him. So Mike Ludwig at MTS Partners in New York is an investment banker who's really a leader in digital health. And he, as it turns out, he worked both with us on our Sumitomo deal and with Owen on his Biogen deal. So
no way.
What's that?
That's awesome.
Yeah. They really help with the structuring, right? How we in digital therapeutics can look a lot like a biotech deal, even though we are not quite that. And so getting that deal structure right is important. The other thing I should mention, and you said this too, Owen, like our partners at Sumitomo, they want a standalone digital therapeutic intervention. This isn't companion app, digital adherence driver for drugs, whatever. This isn't necessarily the norm yet in pharma, but these are companies that don't think of their mission as about drugs. They think of their mission as about interventions and better health. And they're fantastic partners to the point of now that we've been up and running for a while. They are investing a lot in alliance management. There is this mismatch, I don't know what we are now, 42 people, I think, as of today, and they are thousands, right? And so even though they are fantastic partners, there are challenges with speed and pace and all of that. And so it's helpful to spend the time getting the right structures in place, various oversight committees. And, you don't need too much formality, but you need more than we can operate with in order to make sure that, you got the right governance in place with the big partner. And Ben, I probably should have started here. You've got a great track record of research partnerships. I don't know, you may have one like what we're doing and what we have done and Owen's done, but I know you've done a bunch of work with research partners. You want to talk a little bit about that and how that's supported your strategy?
Yeah, it's been interesting. We've worked really close with a lot of academic researchers to help build and run trials for the products. We also work with a CRO for an upcoming trial. And, especially if you need any sort of independence around a trial, there's some benefits to working with CROs. But these partnerships have been obviously influential in getting our product to the state it's in now. The data we've collected and putting us in a position for that FDA clearance, you find a lot of interest within academia, at least within adolescent mental health. Most likely, I'm assuming, for most of the companies in our space. And so it's really nice to be able to leverage that. Just obviously be wary of timelines whenever you're working with an outside organization. Things tend to slow down. So if you're depending on another organization for a trial or for validation or for a key input, just assume it's going to take longer than you would like.
Mm-hmm. Great. So maybe, guys, let's talk about reimbursement a little bit. Owen, you chair the board at DTA, so you're all over this. You want to share some of the recent developments that are kind of favorable for, maybe some tailwinds for us?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting time, right? So and when we dive into reimbursement, the problem is the details sometimes, right? Every scenario may be slightly different based on where your product's used and who it's used by and how much clinician oversight and, is it at home and is it not? But so we could have a whole seminar on that, but some of the tailwinds here are a couple months ago, in Congress was introduced the Prescription Digital Therapeutics Act, which would create a benefit category for digital therapeutics under Medicare as a HCPCS 2 category, which would be really important because right now, if you're a Medicare beneficiary and not on Medicare Advantage, and you have a digital therapeutic product that's used in-home, so not as part of a clinician service, which those are CPT codes, but used in-home, and it's pure software, there is almost no way for, and diabetes is slightly different because there's some carve-outs there, but like there's almost no way for you to get covered under Medicare. And that's a statutory like thing, right? Like there's a DME category, which is used for many home use products, but that needs to be durable in nature. Like software is not durable in nature, so it doesn't allow that to happen. And so this bill would create a new benefit category under Medicare that would allow Medicare beneficiaries to get access to prescription digital therapeutics, software only. Some highlights there are the bill is product specific versus category specific. So like, upon approval from FDA, each product would be evaluated unto itself, which is a big deal actually. And we can get into the nuances of that, but that's interesting. It is mirrored out, like it sort of, it still would require like CMS to make coverage decisions. So it takes no authority away from them. It just creates the piping for reimbursement. And would really fill a large gap in the industry. That right now it's been introduced. It was the bipartisan, Democrat, Republican, by House and Senate, and is looking for something to be tagged along with, assuming Congress passes bills sometime soon. So that's a caveat, but that's big news. In addition to that, also ramifications of that are, even if you aren't in Medicare, like they're a standard setter for all insurance. So like it would roll out across many other types of insurance after that point. In addition to that, PAIR was just granted a code, which is experimental code under HCPCS 2, not covered though, but what that does is it creates the piping for all commercial plans to then pull said A code in and say like, oh, this is how we pay for these type of products. And like then they can set their own price. And so that's really good momentum because like if you think about reimbursement, you need coding, coverage, and payment. If you don't have the pipes, then you can't even get to the payment question. And so that helps set the pipes up. And then under CPT land, there's some positive movement around the monitoring, the RPM codes, supply codes related to that as well, particularly if there's a physician in the loop with the use of your products that are also one to watch. Oftentimes 662 and CPT codes they don't compete with each other, but they play off of each other. And so it'll be interesting to see how that looks long-term. So those are some of the positive movements. The commercial payers also have been, in Medicaid Ben was hinting at this. I think Medicaid's been covering a lot of digital therapeutics. They have more mandate to do other things. So that's some of the stuff. There's much more there, and it's probably another hour to talk about all that. So.
Yeah, Ben, you got anything you want
No, I mean, you did a great job of covering that entire situation. And I would agree, like Medicaid right now is a particularly interesting path towards public reimbursement. And obviously for us, we focus on adolescents, which generally aren't going to be covered under Medicare. So for us, Medicaid or CHIP, which is 65% of teens are going to be covered by CHIP or Medicaid. That's a huge opportunity for us. So we've been looking at that pretty closely, and I've been really excited about everything we've seen over the past few months, including the remote therapeutic monitoring and the new HCPCS codes for PAIR, et cetera, as well as some of the value-based care deals that PAIR has established with various state Medicaid offices.
Yeah, and so you can imagine.
The other thing that's been overlooked a little bit is like individual states are starting to pass laws and things related to like coverage of digital therapeutics. And so that will also like help motivate federal to figure it out, but then like help cement some of the Medicaid scenarios. And I forget, like New York, maybe West Virginia, like a few of those, like at least are considering those. And so that's a, smaller arena, but still will have a large impact over time.
Yeah. So just to connect back to our investor discussion, you can imagine like any of us presenting all of that to an investor that isn't up for the challenge, as opposed to like, how do you get paid? Well, they enter their credit card and it's a SaaS model. Like they have to be up for this, right? Because it is a little bit scary sounding, but this is how interventions scale in healthcare. So the only thing I would add to that great description is, getting your FDA clearance is not enough, right? Payers, I was at Humana for 12 years before I founded BehaVR. And one thing I absolutely learned is payers, their business model is they do want their members' health to improve so that they can consume less healthcare resources, which is how they create value, right? So there is this alignment. They really do care about health to save money, and they're not looking for new things to pay for. So if you just go to a payer and say, here's the data, the clinical data that says my thing is efficacious and safe, they'll be like, that's interesting. Can it save me any money? So you have to have both. And so, we'll all have to lean into health economics, outcomes research, and even more real world sort of analyses of utilization and engagement and impact. Frankly, I think there should be more standardization among payers, so that it's not like if you've convinced one, you've convinced one around the impact. And that's work to do in the industry. That's going to be an important part of this. So that might be a transition then to the next bullet. So value-based care. In general, payers, and this is true not just for digital, but let's say for very high cost specialty pharma drugs, right? When you have a $80,000 drug, payers start to go, whoa. We need a structure where I'm going to pay you full value if it's, if adherence is high and outcomes are good. And if the outcomes aren't good, I'm not going to pay you full value. And then, so that value-based care construct, which has been around a long time and is very slowly spreading across the industry, way too slowly, but still spreading, I think represents a great opportunity for PDTs. If we're, I don't know, doing bundled, payments or capitated models of, ortho care or, anything sort of physical or even drugs, the digital layer to sort of inform a value-based care contract around that is an add-on. It's an extra layer you need. With a PDT, we're digital natives, right? So we know fundamentally if Jen enrolled, we know if Jen is using the product, we know how she's reporting her own states, whatever the product is doing. In the case of, it just depends on the product. I would imagine, Owen, in your product, there's really hardcore low-level measurements of her improvement, maybe gait or other things, right? So we could take that closed loop and really ought to be at the forefront of driving value-based care kinds of reimbursement structures with payers. So anything you guys would want to add there?
I 100% agree. 100%. And we're seeing evidence of that in the market today, which is great.
Yeah, a couple of comments. I mean, for us, right? Our endpoints are looking at walking speed, quality, those sort of things as we think about interventions, right? That's what we'd be targeting. Our sensors collect 40 data points for every step and have all of that built. We have our endpoints built into what we collect every session. And so there's some really interesting ways to make that happen. I think we can drive it. I think there's a willingness for the payer to partner with us to figure out how to write those contracts early on that needs to happen, right? But I think it's definitely in the ballpark to happen. I think on the flip side, I think there's even a higher bar for products like ours, from what I understand, on adherence than any other medical intervention for willingness to pay for them, because they can be, because we know there's a higher bar for proving that it's there than, say, a drug that someone bought a bottle of, etc. So, which is fine. Let's lean into that. Let's own it, and let's show outcomes, right?
Yeah, agreed. Jen, I don't know if you want to add anything. Dime is sort of a leader in helping advance the state of endpoints and sort of what is valid and sort of shared thinking and data sets around that. Do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, Aaron, I'm glad you brought that up. This actually speaks to a lot of work that we've been doing with HIH, so the Health Innovation Hub of the German Federal Ministry of Health. So for those of you who are familiar with the international market, they have the DIGA legislation that's now been running for a period of time. And a lot of what we did through that partnership, and there is a publication in Lancet, and I will make sure I drop that in. And in fact, I see my colleague Smit Patel, who's also an author on that, is on the line. So I'm going to ask him to drop the link for everyone in the chat. Was we actually went through and said, we have the ability now to look at real world outcomes data as a result of using these new kinds of medical products. That is what we've spoken about for decades in the more, when we've administered more traditional approaches. Now we can actually do it. How do we harness that? And what do those evidentiary needs look like? And I think we're close, you know, certainly the scientific capabilities are there to be able to analyze those things. And what we're advocating for is a harmonized approach globally. We need to think about how these measures can translate around different reimbursement regions, different regulatory regions, so that really you guys aren't stuck having to do, you know, the same work multiple times in order to access multiple markets. Another way to look at that is that we aren't causing additional delays for successful products to make their way to patients. So that's what we've been advocating for. And I can see that Smit's just dropped the link to that Lancet article into the chat there. Can I, Aaron, dare I ask a question? Because I think the value-based care piece is really important. And, you know, hard to fathom, but, you know, in some ways I do think I'm a pessimist about this kind of thing, because, you know, we've seen companies come and go, right, over the last few decades, waiting for value-based care to come through. I like the way that you phrased this here, like why PDT should be leading the way on the drive towards value-based care. It's a different instantiation of, we're going to build our whole business model, you know, hanging the hopes that it's going to come to fruition, you know, while we still have time. Can you talk a little bit about the subtlety in that difference, like the responsibility of driving towards value-based care as opposed to sitting on the sidelines and expecting it to happen to complement your business model?
Sure. Well, some of my perspective is just, you know, our fundamental responsibility, and this is why we're all doing it, is we believe we can build great interventions that are going to improve health, and we want maximum impact. Right now, that's stating the obvious, but that's the mission, right? Is we need the most reach, the most impact from these interventions to improve health. So how do we do that? Well, we know that, you know, to a large degree, and unfortunately large degree, people don't expect to pay for their own healthcare. That's kind of weird, but it's sort of true. In some cases, they just can't. In other cases, they've just learned that they don't have to, that somebody else should pay the freight. And so then for me, it's just a simple matter of, again, payers are, it's this duality. I know sometimes they don't have necessarily the best reputation, but I lived inside of one for 12 years. We spent virtually all our time thinking about how to understand our members better and improve their health. It is because it actually also drives the business model. So it is motivating as a mission, and it is how they succeed economically. So we must align to that. And anything that is sort of short of it, like, well, I have this app, it's been clinically studied, it was proven effective in this RCT with 250 people, you should just pay for it because you have to, is not a winning argument, right? There's sort of, people wish that were so, and well, that's how drugs get paid for. I mean, human clinicians get paid for. Many human clinicians are pretty terrible at their jobs, unfortunately, but that, you know, they get paid for their time. We are a different animal. And so I think Owen said it, like, we just have to lean into it. It is a friction reducer. It will be a massive friction reducer. And it's an advantage that we have that I think would be a mistake not to leverage, not to deploy, to say, I can give you far more data about what's actually happening with this intervention than most people can. You cannot get data like this around drug adherence. You can't get data like this around so many things in the system. It's not perfect. Like if somebody self-reports a status in a digital experience, that's not necessarily hardcore clinical data. It depends on what you're building, right? Owen probably has a different opportunity there. Last thing I'll say, not every payer is the same. There's a lot of fragmentation in that market as well. I was fortunate. I worked in a company, you know, Humana was and remains a leader in risk sharing models and value-based care. They're big in Medicare Advantage. And I've been gone long enough now, I don't have the latest numbers, but we were, even 6 years ago, advancing steadily towards 50% of all our Medicare Advantage members being covered under value-based contracts, where some form or fashion, whether it was full risk share or upside delegation, different models of sort of how far along the risk spectrum were you. It was a material part of their business and growing, and they're probably well north of 50 now. I'm not actually sure, but not everybody's Humana. You know, Blue's plan of small state somewhere may not be nearly as advanced, but it is where the puck is going. Maybe just not as quickly as we'd like.
Yeah, I mean, I think value-based care, right, like is like a North Star and a dream. I do know for like a number of the digital therapeutics, like we were hinting at, and like they are actually doing some form of outcomes-based care based on adherence levels, right? Like you get to a certain adherence at a certain time, it triggers an extra payment. Those contracts are being written today and operated on from a couple of our colleagues. And so like, it's just sort of the next step towards that, like in that backdrop that, I could imagine could be taken. Probably will start with these adherence-based contracts at first.
Yeah. We've been actually somewhat fortunate to have like meaningful relationships with various payers on the commercial side. And I know it's mainly, I think, because we're targeting a problem in adolescent mental health where there is just a large growing problem without really good alternative solutions. And so a lot of folks are sort of desperate for new treatment options, including the providers and payers. And in the commercial side, we haven't seen any interest yet in a value-based care relationship. So it seems like that truly will be more on the public side, which I think is fantastic. But in commercial, it seems better to find a way to fit a reimbursement into their existing rails than try to create something new. And that ultimately is like, if we have to do anything that they haven't done before, you can just get caught up in so much red tape that it becomes a non-starter.
Fair point.
I think these are really important. And Aaron, I want to make sure you guys have time to get to sort of the current moment in the market, because you guys are experienced and you've had a great deal of success. And I think your reflections will be a terrific way to end. One of the things you've done a really nice job of during the conversation today is touching on a couple of different business models, right? Through the strengthened partnerships, what's the funding mechanism that you might pursue, regulatory strategy. Tell me a little bit how that overarching business strategy informed, or maybe was informed by, your fundraising strategy. Like, how do you think about these two really intertwined strategies that are critical to the success of your organizations and ultimately the product?
Who wants to lead there?
Sure, I can take that one because we had to make a very important call a few years ago. Back in the day, we were selling tools to therapists, and it was pretty clear that this particular business model wasn't meeting our initial team's mission. And when we got back from population health centers, it was very clear a tool for therapists that wasn't automated wasn't going to meet their needs. And so we had a real heart-to-heart meeting with the handful of team members we had at the time and decided to focus on prescription digital therapeutics. But that was almost primarily informed by fundraising strategy. We looked at major investments in PDT companies at the time and saw a pathway for us to transition a tool to an automated treatment option that would excite investors enough to keep our lights on and to allow us to develop. But throughout multiple fundraising rounds, it was consistent that the investors were saying, we can't guarantee what the business model is. We expect there to be some reimbursement for your products as well as the rest of this. We don't know what it's going to look like. Is it a negotiated pharmacy benefit? Is it going to be more this DME style reimbursement? Is it going to be something completely new that we're going to see, the value-based care deal? I don't think any of the investors mentioned remote therapeutic monitoring at the time. And frankly, they still haven't mentioned until like very recently. And so ultimately the path of PDT was informed for us by investors. The business model that we end up choosing once we are a cleared product, I don't believe is going to be that influenced by investors, but rather by what's being successful in the market. And I think that sort of market success will also drive investor interest.
Yeah, I think for us, like maybe business model is influenced by market and what we're seeing. I think it has to be with different reimbursement models that pop up, and like even like give us 6 months, like that business model might even change if like some of the CPT and the HCPCS, like you sort of have to like look for the railroad or whatever. I mean, we're back to the road. We need like a train engineer as like our the logo for when you send this out to everyone. But when we thought about like who we are as an organization, like that has not changed. Like it like we started out of a hospital. Like we came from medicine. We believe in rigorous evidence. Like we believe in taking the path where like we wanted to get integrated into like most of the healthcare workflow. Like we think that's the way to bring it to the patients. We think that third-party payers, like given our patient demographic, like allows us to serve many socioeconomic backgrounds. And so like we started there and like leaned into that from the beginning and haven't changed from that. But like business models will be dictated probably less so by investors and more so by like how we can like keep the company operating as cash flow positive someday. So
yeah, well said. I think you got to be true to your mission, who you are. You know, I lacked certain advantages, like Ben is a multi-exit successful entrepreneur. So that means it's whatever our idea is, it's easier for him to raise money. He's proven he can do this, right? And so they're like, this guy knows how to do it. For me, they're like, this is some corporate schmo who's probably going to fail. So it was really hard for me to raise money. But, you know, and I mentioned that our business model didn't really map to the pattern matching of investors, and we did it anyway. And that might prove to be a mistake someday, we'll see. But the point is, it was grounded in like our fundamental belief around what is the mission, what problem are we solving, and what do we think is the best way to solve it. So I think there's a lot of investors and a lot of capital out there. Find the right ones who want to work with you and can buy into your vision and mission, and you know, and so maybe that's a transition, Jen, and Smith asked a question about, you know, for early stage startups, thinking about balancing raising capital and generating strong evidence through research and building the team to support R&D. What are some of your strategies that we use to not burn cash so quickly, as there are tight margins? And that's made even more challenging in this market environment where, you know, so far early stage capital hasn't dried up, but it could yet. So what do you think, guys?
Yeah, I mean, cash is king is a good rule of thumb for every startup, particularly in healthcare, where we don't see revenue nearly as quickly as other industries, and investor capital isn't guaranteed, right? Investors investing today doesn't mean they're going to invest a year from now. And we know we're going to need more cash before we get to cash flow positive, right? So the alternatives are either having an alternative business model alongside your PDT development, which is what BehaVR is doing with a suite of wellness products to go alongside their PDT development. I've seen other companies with a wellness product in the B2B space targeting employers, like Happify does. Some companies are even going down a model where they will hire their own providers and do teletherapy or other tech-enabled services style business alongside PDT development. So you do see some of that cash development, though a lot of times those can distract you from your main mission of, you know, getting a cleared product and then getting it reimbursed. And, you know, we see those distractions having trade-offs all the time in companies like ours. So it's a tightrope to walk between, you know, do you generate cash? Do you just do what investors want, or do you raise a ton of money when you can, keep your burn low enough compared to how much you raised so that you have the time to develop a business model in your exact mission? There's no, I don't think, single answer there.
Owen, anything you want to add?
yeah, I mean, I think focusing on, I mean, there's not a single answer, but trying to distill it down to like what is the next milestone that would unlock potentially more capital if you know you need to raise it, right? Like, and oftentimes in our space, it's like proof of concept or evidence, like pivotal evidence, or you know, some sort of commitment from like pilot with payer, even though you don't want to get a pilot right. Like, there's different ones, and you can pattern match. Like, we often would like look at people that were like just in front of us and like map out like where they were and what they had accomplished at each round of funding, and try to like see what valuation that got them, and then try to paint this story for investors that like, yo, we get here, then it 4X's, right? Like, and like, it's so sort of dark magic a little bit, but it, you know, it helps helps them internalize it and then make the pitch to the rest of their partnership on some of those things. And then also, if you're really early stages, like one of the things, I mean, this is like gimmicky, but like the difference between us like having our pitch deck with just Brian and I, and us having our pitch deck with like some really good advisors, like change the whole dynamic in terms of like, oh, you got someone from a hospital and you got like a doctor that's really well known, etc. You know, on board. Like, you know, some of those things don't cost any money, they just cost time, and they help a lot when people are betting on the team at the earliest stages. So yeah, I think those are small things. Everyone's journey is slightly individualized though, so you know, well, it's hard to generalize.
Well said. One thing I'll say, just maybe to close us out here and hand it back to you, Jen. something that both Ben and Owen did really, really well. And if I had a magic wand and can do it over, not that I would want to, I don't want to live the last 6 years again, as fun as it is, but we could have and should have leaned harder really early on into studies, even if it was small studies. I sort of listened to people who thought we needed more of sort of other forms of traction. And I think that was a mistake. So we got a little bit behind the power curve on that. We're catching up now. That's something, Limbix did really well, and MedRhythms as well. So that would be, if you're going to go down the PDT path, I mean, arguably maybe before you even have a company, just have like a sort of core concept, product, intervention, whatever, and go get some data around it.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
Aaron, what a fantastic note to wrap up on. I think sort of leading with evidence is never going to be the bad decision, the wrong decision. And I think so many themes that you highlighted today, guys. Congratulations and kudos. It is clear that you lead with the patient. It's clear that you lead with, you described how regardless of environment, there was always a mission driving this. There was a purpose, there was an intentionality. And it is wonderful to see that when you hold on to that and those values, that you are successful both in fundraising and in bringing these new products in the digital era to bear for the patients, again, that we are all here to serve. So absolutely fantastic conversation. I learned an enormous amount. Thank you to everyone on the line for joining us. And perhaps most importantly, thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Owen, for sharing all of your expert insights with us. I want to make sure we get away on time. I'm going to highlight just a couple of things we have coming down the pike at Dime in case it piques anyone's interest. In fact, tomorrow we have our May virtual journal club. We're going to be looking at a publication from our research committee thinking about reporting adherence measures, as a result of biometric monitoring technologies, and what are best practices around that? How can we start to harmonize and standardize that? It's a terrific publication, and the authors will be diving into that tomorrow. And with that, I do really want to take some time to thank you, Aaron, Ben, Owen. Fantastic insights. Congratulations on all of your hard work, on everything that you're doing, as you said, not only to advance your own organizations, but championing some of the most important changes we need to see in our industry, value-based care being an example. So thank you for all that you do. Thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
thanks, folks. Take care.
Thanks all.